When Mark and Anna Dombkins had their first child, they felt an overwhelming desire to share their love with another child less fortunate than their son. Their commitment saw them move to Tanzania with by then their son and their daughter, where they adopted 3 siblings, bringing their family of 4 to suddenly a family of 7. Back in Australia, they welcomed another daughter and their family was complete. Knowing though that there were so many other children over in Tanzania who needed help, the couple began Forever Projects, whose vision is to empower families to become self-sustaining so they're able to care for their own families. Every dollar donated goes directly to work on the ground to meet the basic needs of families in Tanzania and to assist them in developing their own businesses. I recently caught up with Mark and I so enjoyed his story, and I hope you do too. Mark Dombkins, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you, and I had not heard of Forever Projects before, so I'm keen to learn all about it. And I actually have a little story for you before we start. I was interested to read that you hadn't considered adoption from international kids adoption until your first son, Jackson, was born. And I had a similar experience, but I didn't go all the way like you did, but we did sponsor a child through Child Fund we've been with Child Fund for about 25 years now. So that was following the birth of my first baby, and it just does something to you, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. That was and we hear so many of our community members that have that same experience of just being aware of how much dependence the little newborn has on its mother for just, nutrition and for life. And when that's not available, it's heartbreaking to think about that people would be separated for reasons like poverty. So it's really lovely to hear that you had that experience too. Not only that, but you took action.
Yeah. So Mark, talk me through how it all came about. So you had Jackson and then had this idea that you wanted to adopt some international kids. So, and you had trouble, didn't you, doing that to start with?
And it's like all change and ideas, it just started very innocently. So, we were watching a documentary. Our 6-month-old Jackson was on the couch, and we just were horrified to see these children that were without families, but not only that, in the institutions that they were in, some of the volunteers had kind of snuck in some cameras to expose some of the human rights abuses that were happening in this developing country. And we're just like, how is this the same planet where our child's sleeping soundly and loved and full tummy, and these kids are literally rocking themselves to death? And so that was the kind of seed, I think, in both Anna and my wife Anna and my hearts to kind of go, what could we do to contribute? We didn't think at that point, well, let's move overseas, but we just started considering maybe opening our family up to children that didn't have that hope of a family of their own. Looked at domestic foster care and adoption, looked at international adoption while staying in Australia. But as you mentioned, the system's pretty broken here and doesn't really help families like ours that are wanting to connect with kids that need a family with actually with kids who want one. So it was 2010. We were walking down the beach one day and my wife said, why don't we just move overseas and do this? And
What a woman.
She's amazing. So we moved over to Tanzania in mid-2010. We had our 4-year-old at the time then, Jackson, and a little 1-year-old Jemima, and used our background in education and to get a job at an international school on the southern slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro. And we lived and worked there 3.5 years. So I taught maths, and Anna was a school counsellor and boarding parent to like 30 Tanzanian high school students.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So a boarding parent. So is there some wealth in Tanzania where? Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. So like Australia, there's income inequality is very real around the world, but in a country like that, it's even more severe. And so there are families. I mean, there were international students there and domestic students that were studying at this nice international school and getting a private education. So there's the capacity for students to have that experience, but also wouldn't have to travel too far from the gate of our school to find students or to find kids that just were not even able to go to school because they didn't have enough money. And so the gap between rich and poor is very real.
Yeah. So Mark, why did you choose Tanzania to start with when you could have chosen anywhere? So why?
Yeah, we were really had a heart for some reason for Africa itself. I'm not sure why that was, and then within that, obviously, moving a young family, you want to make sure the country's safe. You want to make sure that you can return home to Australia later on, and that the immigration laws will line up, and then a country where you can get work. And so Tanzania was one of the first ones that ticked all those boxes. And then particularly there was an organisation, once we kind of looked at Tanzania as an option, an organisation called Forever Angels Baby Home, where they were really passionate about keeping kids with biological relatives who'd been abandoned, like finding relatives that could care for them, and where adoption was like a last resort as opposed to a first thing that they might do. And that really resonated with us, that we believed, biological families are the best place for kids to grow up. But where that's not possible, adoptions are great. It's certainly better than growing up in an institution or even worse.
Yeah. So what is Tanzania like to live in, Mark?
It's just beautiful. It's I think that the highs are incredibly high. You can wake up and go for a run up into the coffee fields and be greeted by women who are carrying, full trays of bananas on their heads down to the market to sell, and you greet them in the morning. They're so present. I think time moves more slowly there. People have a greater sense of appreciation of the more important things in life, I think, like family, community, just enjoying things. But the lows are incredibly low. So like I said, you can go from having an experience like that to just seeing people in desperate poverty, hearing stories of people that for no reason, no fault of their own, find themselves in really difficult circumstances through sickness or illness or losing their jobs, and there's no safety net from the government there. So, you can imagine the impacts of that are huge, and we've all experienced the safety net of our government in the last couple of years with, financial support to people who are looking at work or can't work because of COVID, and that just isn't there in a country like Tanzania. So it's both incredibly high and incredibly hard at the same time.
When I was doing my research about you, I was amazed at, I had a sense of pride from the Tanzanians in the way they carried themselves and they dressed. And that to me says that they still have a lot of hope in their lives. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. Yep. Yeah. And one of the big things that stuck with me and Anna as we've moved home is that sense of hope and that sense of kind of generosity and abundance. And so, we went back in 2019 with the whole family to visit and connected with some locals that we kind of met, and some of them are in pretty difficult living circumstances. But when we turned up to reconnect, we turned up with 6 kids, and they've put out a beautiful spread of food and lunch, and we know that this would have cost them a significant amount of their money compared to what they earn. But despite being in scarcity, their abundance is so generous, and that's the posture they adopt. Whereas in the West, I think sometimes even though we have abundance, we're not even aware of it, and we still show up with a scarcity mindset, and we're worried about, do we have enough? Do we have enough? And so, there's definitely that countercultural kind of surprising generosity and hope that's there despite what's going on around them.
So tell me about the kids, how all that played out, the 3 kids that you adopted from there.
Yeah, so we connected with that organisation I'd mentioned earlier, Forever Angels Baby Home, and it just said, look, we're here, we're going to be in the country for a number of years. If there's a need for, and we really felt strongly about biological siblings that have been potentially abandoned together, that, if they've lost their biological mother, at least they shouldn't lose one another. So we said we're open to adopting more than one child if that helps keep them together. And so in end of 2010, that came to pass, and we ended up starting to foster 3 beautiful kids. So twins, Shay and Charlie, and their older biological brother, Jabari. And so we ended up with 4 1-year-olds and a 4-year-old in our care within 6 months of moving there. And I think we were just about to turn 30. So if there was ever a 30th birthday that should have happened, it was definitely that one.
So Jackson was 4 and Jemima was 1.
Yeah, 1, almost turning 2 when we started fostering the kids. And then our eldest adopted is Jabari, and he's around the same age as Jemima. And Shane, Charlie, his younger brother and sister, twins, and they were just turned 1. So there's this period of time in the year where 4 of our kids are the same age, and it's quite interesting.
I can just imagine how quickly your lives changed, going from 2 children to 5 little children. Yeah. But I imagine it was ideal for Jackson and Jemima at that age, because they would not know a life without their siblings.
Totally. Yeah. Jackson remembers life before we moved. Still, he's got a really great memory, but Jemima feels like she grew up. I mean, she did in Tanzania, has no memory of Australia. So when she came home, it was like she was leaving home to come to this new place called Australia as opposed to returning home. Yeah. And that's been really great for their connection and attachment to one another, I think.
So you fostered the 3 kids before the adoption went through.
Right.
And I did read that you felt it was much easier to be in the country and live in that country and adopt them from that end than being over here. So talk me through that process.
Yeah. So the bureaucracy that kind of surrounds the Intercountry adoption program in Australia meant that families could be waiting for 5, 6, 7 years to be linked to a child and eventually foster and adopt them. We've got some friends currently in the system here in Australia at the moment, and their wait's been similar to that. And so our process was at that time, it ended up being 3.5 years from when we moved there to when we eventually had processed the adoptions and moved home. But I think in addition to the timeliness, I mean, there should definitely be a significant time period that you are vetted as a foster parent before a country would allow you to adopt a child. And I think that's really important. So we had a local Tanzanian social worker visiting our home every 3 months, checking in on the kids, compiling a report that years later she'd present to a High Court judge on behalf of the government to say, yes, we are confident that these children can be adopted by this couple. But I think in addition to that, like just having all those years in Tanzania, learning the language, learning the culture, being like falling in love with it was really important. So that when it wasn't just that we kind of flew in and flew out and then had nothing to really share and teach our kids about their culture once we moved to Australia. I think that there's a real unique experience we have where we can return to Tanzania like we did in 2019 and kind of show them around and teach them language like Swahili. And I think that our adopted kids see that we love the country they're from, and that's really important. And I think too, having that time together as a family without all of the distractions of everyday life in Australia just meant that we could be as busy as we wanted to be, really, which was very busy, but we didn't need to overextend ourselves with extra social things that just come onto your plate as a young family. We could just really go, let's focus on integrating these 3 beautiful kids into our family and make sure that that's the priority before we worried about going to Auntie Jenny's 50th birthday or all that sort of stuff that just comes on with time.
Yeah, and I imagine it wouldn't have been easy for any of you coming back and assimilating back into Australian life after you've spent so many years over there. So what were some of the challenges that, you all faced coming back?
Yeah, I think finding a way to integrate all that we'd seen and experienced. So you don't want to forget that because that's kind of shaped who you are, and you don't want to unsee what you've seen, but you also don't want to turn up and be the kind of person at a dinner party that's like, oh, yeah, that looks like a nice steak you've got on your plate there. Do you know how many people in this country don't even have enough to eat? Like, that's not kind and a way to show up. So trying to find where the kind of middle place is between those two was interesting. And I think for us, starting Forever Projects was a real way to kind of embrace that tension where we didn't want to forget about the hundreds of thousands of other kids like ours that have been separated from family. And so, starting Forever Projects was a way for us to think about what could we do from here to fund the Tanzanian teams that were actually trying to work ahead of this malnourishment problem that was seeing families separated, and how could they kind of catch women in crisis before families were separated and empower them to stay together. And so I think Forever Projects, as much as it's benefited the women and children in Tanzania and certainly donors in Australia to have an experience of being generous, it's really helped Anna and I and our family to remain connected to that experience and a way that feels right for where we are back in Australia.
So how long from when you came back, Mark, did you start Forever Projects? Yeah,
we moved back into 2013 and Forever Projects began end of 2015. But we'd run a couple of annual fundraisers even while we'd lived over in Tanzania, and we returned for a visit to visit family, and while we were here we'd run a fundraising event. And so it was those early annual events that we ran that really, I think, showed us, number one, the immense impact that money raised could have on the lives of these Tanzanian women that were being empowered to break that cycle of poverty and create a self-sustaining future, but also was bringing great joy and a really rewarding experience for our friends and family that were giving money and seeing exactly where it went and the impact it made. And we could share stories and say, hey, last year you 60 people gave 16 grand, and check out these stories that these women have names and faces. And so that couple of years leading up to 2015 was, I think, what showed us that this could really be something we could scale up. So we launched it as Forever Projects in 2015 and haven't really looked back since. Just kept on doing whatever we can to, invite more people into this big story we're trying to help tell. Yeah.
So you've even funded a vehicle for Forever Projects over there, haven't you?
Yeah, that was one of our first big fundraising events. So I think it was sometime in April 2017, our local partner said, we've got this 4-wheel drive. It's critical for us to, reach these families we're visiting. Keeps breaking down. And we just a month before that launched Forever Projects with this really unique 100% model where we were making this bold promise to donors and saying, hey, all our Aussie operational costs are covered by a small group of donors. That means if you give $100 for Forever Projects, 100% of it will reach Tanzania. And we want to raise $30,000 in 6 weeks for this car. So what could you come up with? And just, that was a big risk because people might have gone, we got nothing. And it would have been base, but our community stepped up so generously and we hit the target. There was one particular kid named Brendan who decided he'd swim 10 kilometres straight. He was a great swimmer. And so he swam 400 laps of his 25-metre pool where he did his swimming lessons. And we live streamed it on Facebook. And then we said we want to get to this goal before he's finished his race. And all these other people throughout the month have been doing stuff. But I think it was like, 5 laps to go and someone made the last donation. And so as he hit the wall at the end, we said, mate, look at this. We've reached $30,000 and within a couple of weeks, new car was purchased and we shared that with everyone. We actually we're in Tanzania when they bought the car and we traveled there a couple of weeks later. And so we made a thank you video from the car for every single donor that had given. And the local team member, Hassan, one of our friends that was driving the car, was like, in the video. So we kind of video with a selfie in the front seat. Here we are in the new car. How is it, Hassan? And yeah, that real close connection to impact for donors was super important. I think that's that kind of, trust that you have of donors has got to be really rewarded by saying thanks and here's what you've done. So, yeah.
Mark, I always feel more emotional, I think, at the generosity of people than what is actually being fundraised for, because that outpouring of love and hope and giving is just so wonderful. And you must every day feel so grateful for all those people that help you on your journey and give. And there is no better feeling than giving, is there?
That's right. Yeah. And it's such a great, we have this amazing role at Forever Projects of being able to share the vision of these local teams in Tanzania with how they're trying to scale up their work. We share that with our community and then just trust that they'll come up with all kinds of ways to use what's in their hands, is what we say, whether it's their time, talent, money, to kind of leverage what they have for good and then send that money overseas, see it put to work, and then we connect those donors back with what they've done. And then just when people get that email back to go, wow, yeah, I ran a 40th birthday and instead of presents, I, gave money for Forever Projects, and then they hear that, that helps 2 families be empowered. They just, it's a great place to be in the middle of that generosity loop. Yeah.
So Mark, if people want to help you with Forever Projects, how do they go about it? How do they donate money?
Yeah. Obviously the big thing we're all feeling at the moment is the global inflation crisis that's happening everywhere. And we're just actually going out to our community just to kind of say, hey, we know this is a real thing in Australia, interest rates going up, energy, petrol, but this is really biting in Tanzania. And we're not telling that story to make people feel guilty, but just to kind of share this is the reality. And so more than ever, what we're inviting our communities to do is consider if they could give even a small amount, $10, $20, $30 a month on a monthly basis, confident that 100% of that will go to the teams in Tanzania. But that regular, consistent giving is just such immense, provides immense value for our local partners because they know, okay, we've got at least X coming in per month and we can now plan out our work. So that's the key call to action. There's a great video on our site that goes into a bit more about why that's so important if people want to check it out. But also, if it's not money that people have, but it might be their time or their talent or their network, there's all kinds of ways people can get involved. So jump on foreverprojects.org and meet our community who are getting involved and be inspired by their stories.
Now, I am very aware of your time here today, but I just wanted to quickly ask you, you've done some work with Seth Godin, haven't you?
Yeah.
So he's an author and educator. So just can you quickly run me through what you do with him?
Yeah. So Seth's been really instrumental in guiding us from the very start and thinking about how we tell stories and invite people into this big story that we're trying to tell for the projects, and thinking about what does it mean to create culture. And I think that it's 7 words that he uses to describe culture are: people like us do things like this. That's how he describes culture. People like us do things like this. And so from the very start, we've been thinking, all right, for the project's community, who are the people like us, and what are the things like this that we do? And so that's his work's been really instrumental. And then I was lucky enough to get a scholarship into his Alt MBA program in 2019, which is like a leadership accelerator. And then on the back of that, I've done some leadership coaching with him and his workshops. And so that's been an amazing way to kind of give back to the community that he's kind of led. And he's now, as a great leader, kind of tied that project up and passed it on to other people who are now leading it. But it's been an incredible experience for me and for our team to kind of upskill ourselves as leaders and culture shapers. Yeah.
So you would have done all that remotely because he lives in America and you live in Wollongong. So yeah.
And it was interesting. It was in 2019 that I first did that, and so that was kind of before the lockdowns and before pandemic. He was already kind of he'd been fascinated by what online learning communities could be, and he'd seen workshops out there that, you know, the participation rates were quite low, and he was like, how can we get those things up? And so he launched this workshop called the Alt MBA, and so I did that, and then so I think participating in it and seeing just what's possible online, like, you know, you and I aren't in the same room here, but we're connecting, and it's possible to do that really well, just done with intent and generosity. And so that, I think, in addition to the leadership stuff that I've learned, like, it's been great to be able to take those principles and go, you know, we can lead like our team at Forever Projects works remotely. I've not met 2 of our team members. We hired them during the pandemic, and it doesn't matter. We feel really close as a team and been able to kind of take the ingredients into that magic space he's created and kind of try to replicate some of it for ourselves. Yeah.
Oh, Mark, thank you. It's been so interesting hearing firsthand all about what you do, and I'll keep an eye on your progress, and hopefully, you know, we'll find a few people who'll get on board and help you with all of the goals that you have for Forever Project. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks so much, Kelly. It's been awesome.
Thank you for watching and listening to my interview. If you'd like to hear more inspiring stories, subscribe to my YouTube channel or my podcast, and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Life Journey TV.